and everyone can see. You can choose to enable your video or not. Just asking that the microphones be muted just for this first portion of the event. So I am just going to get started. I know I'm going to just be letting people in, and they're going to miss my little spiel, but that's okay. So welcome to the second installment of Merit HR's virtual event series, HR to the Next Power. Again, a few housekeeping items before we get started. Again, make sure that your microphones are on mute. You will have an opportunity to chat with folks. We will be doing a breakout session where you can discuss amongst yourselves and interact with our panelists as well. But for this first part, again, let's just be sure that everyone is on mute. If during the discussion you do have a question, please submit via the chat feature box, and be sure to specify to whom the question is for, so which of our panelists. I will be recording your questions, and if there is time, I will be asking on your behalf, depending on the amount of questions that we have. If we're not able to get to your question, or you're not able to ask during the breakout session, again, I'll be recording those, and I can pass those along to our panelists on your behalf and then follow up with you accordingly. So just as a quick reminder, today's event has been extended to 12:30. We wanted to be sure that we had enough time to interact and have meaningful dialogue with one another. So we just extended that by 30 minutes to make sure that we can get a lot of really great information in today. We want this to be really valuable to you. So in terms of an agenda for today, we're going to do welcome and introductions. That's where we are right now. We're going to meet our distinguished panelists. Then Danika Davis, Merit CEO, will be facilitating an open conversation with our panelists, which will include any of the questions that were submitted in advance. We'll then break into smaller groups for a brainstorming activity, and our panelists will kind of hop around to each of the breakout rooms to answer any questions or to give guidance. Really use them as a resource as you're thinking about the questions that we'll ask. And then we'll reconvene in a larger group to share highlights of the small group discussions. And again, if we have a ton of questions, we might repurpose that time entirely to addressing those. But we'll see how it goes. So I know everyone is eager to get into today's topic, leading through change. So now I will pass it over to Merit HR CEO and Managing Partner, Danika Davis, who will help to introduce today's guests.
Thank you very much, Jess, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to see so many familiar faces as you pop up in little tiny Brady Bunch pictures on my screen. And I wish I had the chance to chat with each of you this morning personally, but that's just not going to be possible. As many as you know, I am a recovering HR practitioner and a lifelong HR evangelist. And I believe that HR is more of a calling than a profession. This work is simply too complex and too impactful to be practiced by anyone who doesn't take the progress of our colleagues and our greater organizations with a kind of missionary zeal to make things better. At no time has this been more true than in the past 9 months, where HR leaders such as yourselves have been at the epicenter of simultaneous changes in almost every element of our lives, and not the least of which is helping to lead our organizations and our colleagues through large-scale change. Today, we will be talking about leading through change, and our accomplished panelists will share their insights. And as Jess said, we encourage your questions. With us today are Victoria Luby, an industrial and organizational psychologist who is a senior client partner at Korn Ferry. Lupe Leon, former vice president of HR for Saxco. Lupe has led the HR function in several Fortune 100 companies across many industries. And Darren Albert, a veteran of marquee tech companies who is currently the head of HR for the global sales organization at LinkedIn. Thank you all for being here and welcome. Let's jump right in with a question for the group. And Tori, if we can start with you as we discuss, how have your thoughts on leadership and specifically on leading change evolved over the last 9 months?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here, Danika and Jessica. We obviously have seen huge amounts of change. We've seen climate control challenges. We've seen the pandemic. We've seen Black Lives Matter, and we've seen our economy just really struggle. And so what we're seeing and what I've seen is an acceleration of a new kind of leader that has been evolving and emerging around the world, but it's accelerated in the past 9 months exceptionally. We at Korn Ferry call this the self-disruptive leader. I'll go into a lot more detail about it in a little bit, but it's a combination of digital leadership, inclusive leadership, innovation, and really creating an ecosystem of information flow and innovation. And if I were to summarize it into 3 brief thoughts, just to get the conversation started, think about it in terms of enabling rapid learning for yourself and for your organization, really exercising empathy. People are in crisis and they really need to know that they are safe. And Lupe is going to go into that in a lot of detail. And curiosity. Curiosity, turns out, is the #1 predictor of a leader being able to be inclusive. So those are the big hot topics, I would say, Danika.
Well, thank you, Tori, and very interested in number 3. Can't wait to hear what you say about curiosity and how that being an inclusive leader in these times of change. Lupe, how about you? How have your thoughts on leadership and leading change evolved?
Yeah, so I will kind of pick up where Tori left off. I think she's absolutely right that curiosity is one of the key elements for us to really be successful leaders. And in doing so, how it is that we approach our curiosity with the team to make sure that we're expressing empathy, that we ourselves also express humility in a way that demonstrates and highlights our authenticity. And then as we go along, the whole notion on transparency and inclusion, I feel has become even more important topics than ever before. And certainly all of these things contribute to psychological safety, which is not really about us being nice people necessarily, but really it's about creating the environment in which people feel safe enough to be able to express their thoughts and ideas and or their experiences. And that really adds to what Tori was talking about in terms of facilitating the information flow and rapid learning. Because unless people feel safety, they're not going to be able to feel comfortable enough to share information and or to do the rapid learning that they need to. It's kind of the old saying about you can't really eat a peanut butter jelly sandwich or whatever your preferred sandwich might be while running away from a bear. And so it's really how do we create the environment in spite of all of these unprecedented conditions and situations that we're living through that will create the environment of kind of it's okay and it's safe for me to really share and provide feedback.
Thank you, Lupe. I know that we're going to dig a little deeper into psychological safety in just a moment, but want to give Darren an opportunity to weigh in on his thoughts on leadership and leading change.
Yeah, I'll just try to complement what Tori and Lupe shared. And there's a couple of thoughts that I captured that I've that have helped evolve my thinking over the last 9 months or so. And one is just the ability to make like robust short and long-term decisions in a world of uncertainty, right? In this environment we've been in with COVID and racial unrest, remote work, we didn't have the luxury of not making certain calls, right? You had to have a decision-making framework and you had to make decisions based on what you could see and or anticipate, right? And be comfortable being agile, knowing that things will evolve. So I think that has been there, but I think this year made it much more crisp. I think the second one that I would call out is leading and dealing with the whole person, right? And I think this is very much in line with what Tori and Lupe said, but the whole person, meaning that like now home and work is integrated, right? So integrated that we have kids joining calls, parents in the background in some cases, we're getting off of the meeting, cooking dinner, like it's doing homeschooling in the middle of the day. It's so integrated. And what it means to be an employee or an employer has changed dramatically, not only virtually, but just who's now in the office, right? If your office is in your house, now you have more teammates that are actually in the office. And how do you deal with the whole person is the other one. And that means that you have to lead compassionately, right? You have to show grace, right? You have to focus on what really matters. What somebody is wearing is less important than just the fact that they're on the call in certain cases and they're showing up despite all that's going on with them personally and psychologically. And then the last one that I would call out is being able to create and continue to instill culture, right? And how does your culture, which was at one point possibly depending on the walls of the building and what was written on the walls, how does your culture now extend in a virtual environment, right? How do you replicate or maintain your espoused culture when you don't have like, you know, a cafeteria to huddle around? And so for us, being very thoughtful about how we use video and how we collaborate and how we and what are those key moments where we want to continue to show up as LinkedIn in terms of our culture. How do we manifest that in a virtual environment is the third area that we've really focused on. And that was a new learning for me.
Fantastic, Darren. Thank you. And we're already seeing some themes emerge from the folks that we're bringing in to lead our discussions here. And first and foremost, I'm hearing anyway, and I'll be curious on the thoughts of others, is while empathy and compassion have always been very important tools in a successful HR person and a successful leader in the broader senses toolbox, that in times of rapid and disruptive change, those are heightened even more, as well as the ability to, for lack of a better word, lead. That even when you don't have information and things are murky, that leaders have to make decisions and help set a direction to move things forward. And that this idea and concept of a whole person. I know when I wish I could go back and slap myself as a new HR person and all the rules I used to enforce when I didn't have any of the life challenges that the people that I was monitoring, I'll put it that way, did. And I think that, as all of you have said, that was on a continuum, and that has accelerated during this time, that we need to work with, treat, and engage with the whole person that is coming to our workplaces. So Lupe, we promised we'd lead off with you and a subject that we know you're passionate about, and we mentioned the word a couple of times, which is psychological safety. And if you wouldn't mind, give us your definition of psychological safety, as well as, you know, how does that play into leading the kind of change and conversations that we've been having in 2020 and moving our organizations forward?
So sure, the definition that I most frequently go to for psychological safety is one of Amy Edmondson's from Harvard Business School. She wrote the book Fearless Organizations, and this is something that she coined in the 1999, early 2000s, that I really just gravitated towards and really believe in. And that was really the notion of creating trusting workplaces that really will get you top performing teams and organizations. And she, you know, really the notion is not that people are distrusting or not able to trust, but that we kind of come into the workplace with this notion of we want to be successful, we want to do well, we want to be a superstar. And so we're going to test the waters before we jump in and give our ideas, or we're not going to share an idea unless we have some level of certainty that it's going to be well accepted. And when we come to the workplace with that already inherently part of us, we're going to hold back our ideas and our thoughts because we're not certain that it's safe for me to share it. And we're not going to necessarily always share our mistakes or our blunders. And so that's going to really limit the ability for me, myself to learn, as well as the team to learn from those mistakes and grow. And it's going to also limit the flow of feedback and conversation and information. And so that's really what psychological safety is all about, is creating organizations in which we really build into the structure as well as into what Darren was calling as the organization culture, ways and systems to both make sure that we're getting feedback about how people are doing with regard to their level of comfort. How are they feeling? So this is where all of the inclusion and transparency and curiosity comes in that we talked about, that Tori spoke about. It's about the creation of culture that is going to really help build more and more psychological safety. And so that's really the definition that I use and what I see as what is psychological safety.
Thank you. And how do you think that that plays into leading people through change? Why is psychological safety so important, especially now?
Yeah, so it absolutely critical. I think that those organizations that we see as resilient and as successfully just going through this, we'll just call it quantum change that we're living through, are going to be organizations that have figured out, or leaders that have figured out a way to really keep people feeling psychologically and physically safe enough for them to share and have what Tori talked about, the information flow and the innovation and rapid learning occur. Even in a time of stress, if you have a leader who can provide a sense of, we don't know what we don't know, but we do have a little bit of certainty, and here's what I do know, and kind of the faith of we are going to and can together get through this kind of sense and build on small wins that add to that psychological safety. Those are the organizations that are going to be resilient and are going to not only be successful, but really come out winning in huge ways through this situation. And those are the kind of organizations that, as Daryl talked about, are going to be looking at much more of the whole human being, coming to work at home or being home working with all of the aspects of life that all of a sudden are presenting themselves in the workplace, that and how we incorporate more of the whole person. How do we create an inclusion, a more inclusive environment? So I really believe that it's critical for, especially during these times of unprecedented change, for people to be able to feel comfortable to speak with candor, especially with these changes in 2020 that will help organizations get the kind of information flow they need, have their teams go through the rapid kinds of learnings that is needed, and innovate through these times.
Lupe, I'd like to come back to you in just a moment to give maybe some specific examples of how you've promoted psychological safety, and then also perhaps how you can tell when it's there. But first, if we can take a minute and Tori, if you'd like, Victoria, excuse me, would you like, I don't know which I should call you. I'm going to call
Tori.
you Tori, thank you. That, what are your thoughts around psychological safety as being a key element of how we lead in these times?
Yeah, it's I was listening to Lupe speak and was just really smiling and enjoying your comments, Lupe, because you know, part of what I wanted to share today is some of our research where we actually did it about 2 years ago, as I mentioned, on this self-disruptive leadership model. And there are 5 elements of what a self-disruptive leader looks like. And this model is connected to business performance. So this is not just a trend. This is not just a nice to have. This is required for business performance in this new environment. And when I said before, it's accelerated, the need for it is accelerated. One of the components is trust. And what we mean by trust is a new kind of intimate, sorry, I'm speaking to a bunch of HR professionals, professionally intimate relationship with employees. So for leaders to know each individual employee, and back to Darren's point about the whole person, understanding what excites that person, what motivates them, what are they aspiring to be, and to encourage that leader to also think about what this organization needs. So it's this mutual, it's trust to build a mutual relationship based on exploring, understanding, and finding a common purpose. And that is very much connected, I think, Lupe, with what you were saying around psychological safety.
Thank you, Tori. Darren, anything to add on how you have brought psychological safety and ensuring it's there and how you've used that in your leadership efforts over the past 9 months?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways. I think one is being vulnerable, right, and modeling vulnerability, right? And I think if there's anything that we've learned, and certainly I've learned during this time, is that like it's okay to not be okay, right? It's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to create space and time in those staff meetings at the beginning of the meeting when you're with the team, whether it's the leadership team that I partner with versus my direct team, to just go around and say like, how's it going? Like a real check-in, right? A real check-in. It could be 30 minutes out of an hour, hour and a half staff meeting, just a real check-in. And if you model, right, like, hey, I'm struggling today, right? Like things aren't okay, right? I'm seeing a therapist, right? Because I need to work through some things that are challenging professionally and personal, like the ability to be real, right? And again, not only talking about employees as the whole person, but you showing up and talking about your whole self, I think is one way to let down the guard. And you have to do it in a way that works for you and is authentic and not like putting yourself too far out there in that quote unquote danger zone, but in a way that creates a level of realness. And so for me, that's one example that I would give.
Thank you, Darren. Now, Lupe, I promised to come back to you to get specific examples on steps you can take to actionable steps to ensure people are emotionally and psychologically and even physically. You brought up physically safe. That's a big issue for those folks who their work environments are such that they're not in their guest room in their slippers having a Zoom meeting. I might have given away too much information right there. They have people in the workplace.
So it's a multi-dimensional, multifaceted topic, and really needs to be looked at from kind of a whole systems thinking approach, starting with just the physical safety, simple things, right? So, and to what Darren was talking about, it's about really connectedness, us all connecting as human beings. And if we can connect as human beings, then we can from there build that trust and feel empathy with and for each other, and be more aware of how it is that I'm showing up. Am I being respectful, thoughtful, inclusive, all of those things, right? So I'll share my story about this whole situation. So Saxco has both essential and not essential employees that are having to come to work every day, and also another significant group that was remotely, and we moved everybody from office setting to remote. We already previously had some remote employees, but this really was almost a split. 50% employees then were essential workers and 50% were remote. And so I and my team, incredible team that I have, quickly set out to make sure that everybody had the tools, the training for the remote work, really focused on are they on teams? Do they know how to function with teams? Getting training for them on all these levels. And then, oh my gosh, how do we stay connected with them? So let's make sure we have everybody's current address, phone number, simple things like that all across the organization. And now all of a sudden, okay, well, let's set up a daily check-in calls. Every manager is required on a daily basis to do check-in calls. And so we went through this just action focus, implement, and then over on our essential workers, make sure that, okay, we're implementing the social distance, so we're hand washing, making sure that all of the supplies are in place, just ongoing. And it just kept just more and more and more. And so here I am working just really intensely all of a sudden, and my team is doing the same thing really hard. And so I'm just, for the first 2-3 weeks, I'm just intense working, I don't know, in some cases 16-hour days, waking up and doing it all over again, just really hardcore. And all of a sudden, one weekend on Friday, it started, I remember clearly that all of a sudden I was just completely out of energy. I just couldn't bring myself to even sitting and or looking at a computer or a monitor for one more second. And it was everything I could do to just get everything critical that Friday evening done and just turn the computer off. And I was fortunate that I had a separate room where I call it the office, close the door on it. And the rest of the weekend, it was this just flow of tears that came over me. It was just, I think, a combination of the stress and of the concern of and the loss of what we had just gone through, and all of the uncertainty. And it was one of those weekends where I just at the drop of a hat or whatever, a pencil, I just would start to just cry. It was the hardest just thing. I'm always someone who's strong and resilient for my team, and you can't, make them worry about you because you've got to be there for them, all of those things, right? Well, come Monday morning, and we have the Monday morning stand-up call. And after a number of calls, it's time to meet with my team. And I remember thinking, this is about me showing up as my real self. There's nothing else that I can do but truly check in. If I'm going through this, my God, what are they going through with all of the demands in their home? And I just showed up, said good morning. And I said, just rather than starting out about all of the critical things I had to do, just said, so just want to just check in with you guys. We've had conversations of some of the things that we might be able to do to help our team members, but I want to know how you guys are doing. I was just really quiet, and I said, well, let me start with myself. And I told them the story of how the weekend had been so difficult and so emotional because I felt so much of the loss and the struggles that we as a humanity and a group were going through at this moment, and wanted to know how they were doing around it. And at first it was dead silence. And I told myself, I'm just going to give that gift of just silence. Silence is golden. And let's just see what comes out of it. And I was just quiet. And after what seemed like, I don't know, an eternity of silence, one of the team members, and this was a group of 5 individuals on the call, the one that I felt would be the least comfortable with it, just came up and said, yeah, let me tell you about my situation. And just started sharing about how hard it was for him with the kids, with his wife, who's a frontline health professional, and the stress of the fear of the not knowing and not being able to walk out. And that just kind of rolled into really just some amazing conversation that I think really built, started to build even more. And I felt really good about the team I had even before going into this and our connectedness. But that really took our level of connectedness to a whole new place. And really then from there, we could say, so what do you think is going on with the rest of the team members if we're experiencing this? Let's find out.
And what a powerful example. And thank you for being so vulnerable with us and demonstrating what true leadership and authenticity can look like, even if it's not in a good place. And also sharing with us that it doesn't have to be these super high ideals of establishing trust, which is what we're working on. But we remember Maslow's hierarchy, remembering that people are safe, that they have the tools to do their job, that they know how to use those tools. And then you modeling that are all things that we can do to help push us along the continuum of making people feel psychologically safe. And your story was very powerful. And again, thank you for sharing that with us this morning.
My
and
pleasure.
Coming back to each of you throughout the time. If we can, I'd like to move over to maybe how we manage these organizational shifts, perhaps with psychological safety as a basis. And Darren, I'm gonna start with you, with your permission, and you can't do anything about it because I just called you out in a room. So while we're always responding to change from outside forces and driving change as human resources leaders and professionals, and even in times of crisis, as you mentioned, that we've found opportunities within those crises. Let's talk about how managing change, organizational change, is different right now. And specifically, how can HR drive this change and communicate, particularly in this remote environment we all find ourselves within? The cult of personality no longer works the way it used to. So can you kind of walk us through managing organizational shifts and change in the modern day?
Yeah, it's very dynamic, to say the least. Let me give you a couple of updates. And I thought about this question. I'll tell you what's changed about leading change, right? To start with. So for me, I have a master's in OD, and I really subscribe to the John Cotter change model, right? If there's some who might be familiar with it, really simple, 8 steps. And one of in my opinion, one of the key aspects of the model is around creating coalitions, right? And teams that galvanize around the change you're trying to drive. And then you kind of expand the tent, for lack of a better term, as you go. But in this environment where we're working remote, living remote, you can't have those workshop meetings, those offsites all day where you get in the room and you whiteboard, right? And you brainstorm and you come up with ideas and you build out the project plan, right? And it's scribbled and somebody takes the flip charts and transcribes that into, a PowerPoint. Those days are done, right? And so So what that means is that when you're trying to build coalitions to help manage the change, we're not even talking about like the broad employee base yet. We're just talking about like the leadership team or leadership teams that have to drive the change. There's it's so virtual now that you're spending a lot more energy in cycles trying to like, okay, it's not a, you can only stay on a call roughly like 4 hours, right? So the full day off site where you work into the evening and then come back the next day, like those days are done. So you have like 4 hours of concentrated time where you're trying to power through some things. And what I found is that one, having the right audience for the virtual meeting is so critical now, because if the group is too large, people get lost. If it's too small, you don't have the right people in the room virtually. So having the right people in that room for the 4 hours and being very clear about what is this for project team's role is the place where we've had to spend a lot more time to kind of re-envision or reimagine what a change leadership team looks like. And then the second one is now, what are the additional work streams that have to be driven in order to make the change happen over time, right? Think about systems, structure, talent, processes, all of those different work streams. No longer can we huddle, we have to figure out how to do it virtually, which means that we're spending a lot more time in meetings, right? And working through issues through collaboration tools like ideas boards when you want to do brainstorming, Microsoft Office in the cloud, because we have a lot of docs that are shared, or Google Docs. It's just a game changer in terms of how you collaborate and how you drive change. That's so that's one part, and that's kind of the behind the scenes part of the change, right? The more public part is still comes down to some of the core tenets around creating a sense of urgency and a compelling vision about what the future state could be. Right. And at LinkedIn, we went through like our first layoff, right? It was a massive layoff back in the July timeframe. And leaders who had grown up here, most have not experienced that before, let alone employees. And if you think about our average manager age, I think it was like 29 years old or so. Average employee age a little bit younger. So I was saying like, oh my gosh, like the last financial crisis or downturn we had, like they were not even in, like some were in high school, not even working. And so our ability to lead through that change really required us to be very clear about the sense of like why we needed to change now and what would happen if we didn't deal with the uncertainty that we were facing with COVID, but then paint a picture about where we could be over time, and then have bite-sized operational gates that we would try to hit, that we would say like, okay, you know what, we got through Q4, you know, the customer story or view is not as bad as we thought. Yes, our bookings are down, but customer sentiment is high, right? Got through Q1. Oh, customers, it's actually not as bad as we thought. A turnaround is coming. Look at our wins. And then Q3 and Q4 are about like, now where can we go, right? And how do we recognize the hurdle that we've been through, but that we're doing it together as one team, and the future is bright, and keep building on the wins and success is really what our change has been about. And it's not clean, right? Change is not, anybody who's led massive change, you know, it's not cookie cutter, it's not straightforward, but some of the elements were being able to paint that picture, being able to galvanize the right team, being able to do that in a virtual environment, calling out your wins, your key wins that help you build success and build credibility back. And then the last one I would say is just monitoring, right? Being very intentional about listening to what the organization has to say as you're on the journey. So Glint is our employee survey tool that we actually own Glint. So we are sipping our own champagne and we use it quarterly, if not even more frequently, to measure employee sentiment, but also just employee wellness and kind of our response to COVID. And so our ability to have our finger on the pulse of where employees were and are gives us the ability to tailor our communications and tailor our change strategy and approach based on what we're feeling and sensing from the org.
Thank you, Darren. As somebody who doesn't work with a bunch of 27 to 29-year-olds, it didn't occur to me that in tech companies, most of your leadership hasn't experienced anything that touched it. So those of us who've been through it a couple times are kind of pulling some hairs out that might have some gray at the roots. What's it like for the others that haven't been through it? And what I heard you say is really having to be much more mindful about how you package the change and sharpening that saw before you start on the tree, breaking it down, who's in the room, what do they need, all of those types of things. Tori, what are your thoughts around this concept of managing the shift from a more tactical perspective based on what Darren shared?
I think a couple of things. So I think part of what you were talking about, Darren, was another example of exercising empathy and really understanding where people are. And how do you help them through this change, whether they are going to be the survivors who stay or the ones who are asked to move on. Things are so fluid from a talent perspective these days. The people you let go today may be the people you want back in not too long. So it is so important to have that empathy and to treat people with respect. Gets back to even that trust idea of really understanding individuals and where they are and who they are and how do you help them, whether or not they're going to be your current employees or not, but they might come back. I think this other piece around driving change, and Danika, I'm like bit by bit telling you everything that I was going to tell you back in my section, but that's okay. We'll go with the flow. So I think there's a piece around anticipating, which is part of this new model of the self-disruptive leader, is people who are able to, leaders who are able to anticipate, are able to make decisions faster. And in these crisis moments, fast decisions are critical. It removes some of the pain, even if it's a painful decision. And then being able to drive through that and execute that. And I think, Darren, a lot of what you were talking about around going through the Cotter model is exactly that. How do you not just drive the project plan, but how do you drive the organization emotionally and tactically?
Fantastic. Lupe, anything to add on?
Yeah, I think really to just add to what both Darren and Tori mentioned is the why, really clarity on the why. And I think that in these times, it's even more important for us to use good models, as simple as things like meeting agendas and clarity on every meeting needing to have a clear stated agenda and purpose, so that you are helping with some structure to help with all of the uncertainty, if you will. And then I think also very important is consistency from the leadership team, and that is to being consistently visible and to really communicate on a consistent basis and make sure that you're doing all you can to get and encourage that two-way communication, the feedback, the curiosity, the asking of questions, that making yourself visibly and vulnerable in an authentic way to encourage that are all really critical in this for the tactical sense of managing through change, if you will.
Darren, any final thoughts on leading change in the remote environment?
I think what I will tell you is that don't underestimate the amount of effort that it takes to do so now, right? The amount of time I'm looking at my calendar, we're working on some transformative efforts, and the amount of meetings that you have to have now, right, to move the ball forward and to stay connected and to stay on the same page, and core team, sub team, status team, prep before the, and I don't think it's a LinkedIn phenomenon, although I think actually it is a little bit. But I think there's just also the reality that we're not able to have the water cooler conversations or the hallway passes, or we're walking to the car, let's sync up. So just recognize that the ability to lead change in this new virtual environment just requires a lot more effort. I think we're all figuring out how to do it smarter, right? But we're in the middle of it's hard right now, right? And we haven't figured out all the tools to make it easier yet. And so just recognize that that's just part of the game. And if you have suggestions, ideas, like definitely reach out and share, please. Would love to hear them.
Maybe somebody will offer to take some of these meetings off your calendar, Darren. Who knows?
I love that.
It's a giving group. Well, thank you for bringing up all of these good insights. And my graduate reading was Cotter as well. So I recommend it to those who'd like a good foundation in this. And now, Tori, if we haven't taken your entire what you were planning on sharing, and I know you could never run out of information given the breadth and scope of your practice, but we were talking, you've already mentioned several times that earlier this year, your firm proposed a new model, which you called the disruptive leader, and that this was before COVID and the pandemic and those types of things, but it turns out to have been somewhat prescient with what's going on now. So what is that new profile for leaders and who have what it takes to get through disruptive times? And then what are the required qualities and how do you assess them?
Sure thing. And slight nuance, we actually reference it as the self-disruptive leader.
I'm sorry.
Which
I forgot
get your head around
word.
that, because it's the leaders who are constantly recreating themselves and their organizations. So in the spirit of using adult learning method of repeating myself a little bit, I'll walk you through a couple of the key points. So what we have found in terms of this new kind of leader, and it's not that everybody should be this kind of leader, but it's a new flavor that needs to fold into the talent population, is there are 5 components of the self-disruptive leader. One is, and we call it the ADAPT model, but I'll walk you through the 5. One is anticipate. Being able to anticipate what might be around the corner and being prepared for it is enabling leaders now in this moment in 2020 to make quick decisions and provide clear direction. And that reduces the anxiety, it reduces the noise in the system. So to give you an example, Kaiser Permanente, based in the Bay Area in Oakland. I'm working closely with the Chief Digital Officer, whose name is Prat Vamana. And what was really amazing to watch there was before the pandemic hit and before we all went into shelter at home, they delivered in Northern California 14% of their services through telemedicine. In 5 days, they delivered 90% of services through telemedicine. So I asked him, how did you do that? Because you didn't even have a blip. You had no security issues, no platform issues. It just flowed. He explained the concept. He didn't use the word anticipate, but he explained the concept of anticipate. And the CIO and the whole IT team living in the Bay Area is constantly planning for how do you handle some kind of catastrophe? How do you handle the earthquake? How do you handle the wildfire that finally makes it to Oakland, God forbid? And so they had a catastrophe plan. Now, they didn't know it was going to be for a pandemic, but they had something in plan so that when that hit, they were able to execute right away. So that's just a great example of anticipate. The second is drive. Drive is about being able to energize people and give people a sense of purpose. Now, that's not so much for a crisis, but it absolutely is relevant for change. Connecting people to your organizational purpose and why they should give you the discretionary effort that's needed to go above and beyond what they're currently doing. Really super powerful. The third area is being able to accelerate. Now, this is, remember what I said, the model's very much about leaders who are enable ecosystems of innovation and information flow. Accelerate's a really key component in that these leaders are not just about innovate for the sake of innovation. They're not just for grab any creative idea and go with it. They have an innate capability of knowing what to innovate, what innovation is actually going to be implementable, and where to focus effort and energy, and doing really quick prototyping. We talked earlier, Lupe and Darren talked a lot about, we're not trying to do everything perfect anymore. We're trying to do something. And that accelerate piece is really part of that. So the fourth area is partner. And this is about helping people connect across boundaries. Now, that might be within the organization, or it might be outside the organization. This event is a perfect example of you, Danika, partnering and just bringing people together. So that ability to create forums and make it easy for people to exchange ideas, super powerful and needed. And in fact, when we did our research globally, we asked investors what they thought were going to be the most important part of this model for different geographic regions. And for the United States, investors said partnering was going to be one of the most important drivers for business success going forward. The fifth one is trust. And I mentioned trust before, and it's that really tight relationship with each employee to help them grow, to also help integrate diverse ideas and diverse perspectives. And that's where that curiosity comes in that I mentioned, being curious about people and trying to get to know them. So Danika, those were the 5 areas. In terms of assessment, I mean, you can imagine I would just say assess for those things, but the most important ones that we are finding really influence leaders' ability to navigate change and drive change is look for, and both Darren and Lupe mentioned this before, look at people as a whole person. We are absolutely seeing a shift from just assessing on competencies and just assessing on technical stuff. Of course, you have to know that. But really looking at the personality traits that help drive this leadership style, and look at how much agility people have, how much presence they have, and there are personality traits that drive that, and then how much striving or energy or persistence they have. So those are a couple of thoughts.
Well, thank you for sharing those. I had the pleasure of reading the report, or the summary report, last night.
Oh, good.
He's for missing self-disruptive leader. And it talked a lot about the CEO level. How do you see this in perhaps an HR leader? Is it just as important if you're the HR leader as if you're?
Oh, for sure. I would say for any C-suite level executive, in our world, we are constantly looking at succession into C-suite, and what we're actually seeing is more and more, especially in the middle of the pandemic. It was amazing. The clients have started to reach out to us very proactively to realize, we don't actually have a great succession plan, and turns out everyone's vulnerable, so we should probably think about that. So we're seeing a shift to long-term succession management for all C-suite levels, Certainly the CHRO is one of those, and also the CHRO plays a very key role in that whole process. And the big shift we're seeing at that C-suite level, very much aligned with the self-disruptive leader model, and very much about how to help businesses turn the corner. So, that progression and succession management conversation is less about near term and more about long term, and how are these businesses going to leapfrog? And it all keeps coming back to this self-disruptive leader model.
Thank you for sharing that, Tori. Lupe, any thoughts come to mind based on what Tori shared with us?
Yes, I was on mute. Sorry about that. So, yeah, I believe, and one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about the human resources profession and field is that I firmly believe that we HR are really setting the heart rate of the organization. And I think it's really important for us to really look at this self-disruptive leadership model. And see how it applies to us. How are we actually anticipating and developing our abilities to do all of these 5 key things that self-disruptive models identifies.
And Darren, did Tori's comments inspire any thoughts from you?
And I've been taking notes as Tori was speaking.
I'll send you the paper.
Yeah, please do. Please do. It's spot on, right? I think this notion of anticipate is still a somewhat of a newer concept, right? I think before it was like be forward looking, be futuristic, but anticipate is like, okay, I'm looking around the corner and I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen next, right? And I found that to be very inspiring, right? Just to really start using that terminology more at work, right? I won't steal the full Korn Ferry adapt model, but I will, unless I can, Tori, but I definitely took quite a few nuggets away, and it gives me a different terminology to use with leaders, right? I think than what I've been using historically in the partner piece. We talk about collaborate, but partner and then trust. Trust is something that like we just kind of take for granted that it's going to be there. We talk about integrity, but trust is another term. I just like the adapt model. So thank you, and I will incorporate with the right level of responsibility.
Very welcome.
Thank
The
you,
irony is that LinkedIn and Korn Ferry work together quite a bit. So we'll talk.
Yes, we should.
And Tori, we're about to go into our small group breakouts. Any final thoughts on this new model?
The only thing that I wanted to add was the other thing that we're seeing, and it's connected to this, is, and I swear we didn't plan it, but it is true. In the context of diversity and equity, it turns out that those leaders who are from minority backgrounds, actually we're finding are some of the best self-disruptive leaders, just because of how they've had to navigate their careers because of the prejudice that was working against them. So we are encouraging folks more and more to really sincerely keep those diverse slates open and look for your diverse high potentials in addition to your usual high potential populations. There are a lot of hidden gems out there.
Excellent advice, Tori. Thank you for closing with that. And now I'll turn it back over to Jess so she can give us our instructions.
Sorry to cut everyone short. I know there's a lot to talk about. We're back. All right.
And Jess, she shared that we had some questions from the group.
Yes. So what I think we should do with the time that we have left are go through some of the questions that the participants have been sending over to me throughout the course of this conversation. So I'm just going to jump right into it. I've tried to organize them, according to the person who maybe spoke to that topic. But I think, again, all three of you could speak to any of these. So, and you've also answered some of them throughout the course of your sections. So I guess we'll start with Lupe. One of our participants asked and has shown interest in learning more about how to create psychological safety through a DEI lens.
The DEI, I'm assuming, is Dimensions International?
No,
it's DEI.
Oh,
yeah, DEI. Sorry.
Oh my God. Well, I think
I'm curious. I'm curious.
DEI. Thank you so much. A little bit of humor, I guess, comedy relief. So I really believe that it is about DEI in the full sense. That if you don't have a work environment in which people, regardless of what their outer shell may look like and or gender identification or any of that, if they don't feel that comfortable sharing and speaking, or if they feel that they're being inappropriately judged or put in some sort of a box and not being really heard, you're not going to have them be able to contribute their full self. And they're not going to feel connectedness. They're going to be disengaged. And so how do you create it through the DEI lens? I think the way that if you're able to build more and more of that psychological safety, and that's, really creating a much more open door concept with people being able to freely feel that they can give feedback, that they can make errors without being overly punished, and that they can learn from all of those things, you ultimately get there without it having it be focused just on that, because it is about empowering and enabling more of it. I don't know if I've answered the question or not.
No, that's great. Yeah.
Let me, and if I could build on it just a little bit, because I think Lupe made some really important points. It's back to this curiosity piece. And you can't, when you're trying to make people feel safe, you can't assume that you know what that is. All of your stereotypes, all of your unconscious bias, you have to just throw it out the door. And the only way to do that is to ask questions.
So I am, Darren, anything to add? I do have a specific question for you, but.
The only thing that I'll say that I've been playing with in this subject related to DEI is just situational leadership. Right? That's something that's such a 90s term, right? And somehow we've forgotten about just recognizing that you have to meet people where they are, right? And you can have 5 people on the team, and the way you need to engage them on an individual basis can be very different. So what happened to situational leadership style, right? That's the only thing that I'd call out as a scaffold back to an old practice.
So actually, let's just kind of wrap on that topic. So someone asked about how you as a leader address potential inequities that might arise when asking your employees to return back to work. This whole where the vaccine is here, right? What do we do? Employees are working, they're working parents. They might not have the same freedoms or flexibilities as some people. How are you thinking about keeping things fair? I mean, certain schools might not reopen and certain schools might. So how do you think about the inevitable inequities throughout your staff and how to address those things? What are you thinking about?
It's a tough one, right? And it's happening right now. I don't have a great answer. Let me just headline that. I think here's what we do know, right? We do know that we're going to be in a hybrid world, right? So the idea of returning to the office 5 days a week is done, right? At least That's my firm belief. And I think there's a question. Yeah, I think if we can get to 3, that's a question, right? Around like, what does work really look like in the future? Knowing that by the time we are back into the office, most jobs, at least in like tech, right, and where I'm at in my team, can be done remotely. So like we've worked remotely for 12 to 15 months by that time. To say you have to be in the office 4 days, 5 days a week is just asinine. And so I think what we're trying to figure out is, what does this hybrid flex world look like? And we're starting with like, long story short, we're at the very early stages of like really trying to get a methodology for making decisions on a org, team, and employee basis. Right now, what I will tell you is that we're looking at like, what is the characteristics of the work, and then what are the dynamics of the team, right?
Mhm.
And what does the organization need going forward? And that lens has like subcomponents to it, and we're trying to use that structure to help us create a methodology that can then be rolled out and adopted within the organization, right?
Can I
What we
off?
did,
Oh,
yeah, please go for
nope.
it, Tori.
I didn't want to cut you off. You sure?
Yes.
Okay. So a couple of things that we're seeing, because everyone's trying to work through this, in addition to everything you just said, Darren, you have to ask if people feel safe. You can't force people. That won't work. And for those who don't, I mean, 100%, I think we're heading to a hybrid workforce model for most positions. And so some of the things that we're seeing is, really making sure that people who, for whatever reason, prefer or need to work at home, that they get a proper at-home kit, all the technology, all of that. They get advice on how to make that happen. But the other thing that we're realizing is there is this hybrid. It's not probably 100% remote. It is probably a situation where you come into the office for certain needs, and ask people what they would need to make that possible. So we're seeing a lot of restructuring of rewards and benefits programs to meet the new situation that people are in. And actually, we're finding that a lot of times there's a trade-off, and what people need now actually is costing less. So something to think about.
Um, I'll jump in.
Please.
So we actually have been struggling with that all through this process, because we had both the individuals working from home as well as essential workers that had to come to the office. And so those essential workers that had to come to a work site, I should say, to our production area, well, guess what? School was out, and so their kids were also out of school, and they also needed support in a different way, right? And so we at the beginning, and also some of them were very afraid to come to work and not feeling physically safe. Or some of them had elderly or people with compromised immune systems at home that they were concerned about. And so we also have really worked hard and struggled with, how do we make it equitable for those that have no choice. And then we had individuals that were working from home, but were having a really difficult time, because working from home really had them feel quite isolated. And then you had other challenges for them. And so we had to challenge ourselves with really thinking about asking ourselves why. So why does someone have to do the work either remotely or on site? And even, why does someone have to do the work from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., right? And just really, really kept asking those questions for ourselves. And for the essential workers, we found and discovered that some of them would like to maybe come in second shift instead of first shift.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think being flexible, and to kind of echo a word that has been used throughout the course of this conversation, fluid, right? I think it's case by case basis. You have to evaluate And I would be very happy to be in all of your hands and the folks making the decisions, Danika, Lupe, Victoria, and Darren. I would be pleased to work at for any of you. You sound very, capable, and I think all of you probably really do a good job of creating this safe place. And again, certainly appreciate you guys coming to talk about your own unique experiences. It sounds that, like, again, there are some themes that are emerging, but everyone's experience has been a little bit different, and really appreciate you guys spending some time. I want to be mindful of time. It is exactly 12:30. Danika, do you have any final thoughts to share before we wrap up here?
Just a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And in my own HR career, if there are any two hallmarks of success, it is asking questions and having an innate level of respect for other people. And if you don't have a good, healthy level of respect for any individual, then I don't think you should be practicing HR. So I'll leave with that as a final comment. And happy to be around kindred spirits here who I know feel the same. And we look forward to our next event, which many of our topics of discussion today set us up for, which is inclusive leadership. And look for more information on that. There will also, I know, because I know Jess, there will be a survey, my data queen over here. And I'm glad she thinks I might be good at this since we do work together. And just wonderful to see you all and to talk about such an important thing. And thank each of you for what you do every day to make people's lives better.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Have a great day. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.